right. Well, thank you everyone for attending the Startup Grind events for April. We host events every first Tuesday of the month. And just to introduce myself, my name is Michelle Hefner, and I work for this company, CoAdvantage. We are a corporate sponsor of the Startup Grind in Austin. And what we do is we're a professional employer organization. So I know it's an acronym that a lot of people are familiar with, but we focus on helping small businesses really grow and thrive in what they do. We take on the HR, payroll, benefits, 401k, and really make small businesses competitive to larger entities. So, love to meet with all of you at the end of this, but we're really here for our guest speaker, and it's Chris Gerritz with Infocyte. So at this point in time, I'm going to hand this over to Michaela.
All right, let's go ahead and give Chris a round of applause for being here with us today. So his company, Infocyte, he's the CEO and co-founder of the San Antonio-based developer of cybersecurity solutions. They have invented the only interactive security platform designed to rapidly scan networks for evidence of intrusion without the burden of complicated equipment or endpoint software installations. But Chris did a few things before this. So Chris, what did you do? You told me you're getting out of the military. Can you tell everyone what your background was before Infocyte?
Sure. Yeah, I did about 10 years in the Air Force, enlisted, went to college, and then went back as an officer. Primarily, I did cybersecurity. So I started out with encryption, went to college for computer engineering, and then did a little stint flying for about a year, got hurt, and they sent me back down to Lackland, where the medical facility is. Also happens to be the site for Air Force Cyber Command. So I walked up there, showed them my credentials and said, "Do you have a job for me?" And they threw me back into that world. And so for the past 5 years, I've been with that. And so the Air Force Computer Emergency Response Team is responsible for defending the entire Air Force network, which is about 800,000 computers. And in the last 2 years, we stood up a new mission to counter some of the hackers that were coming out of Russia, China, and Iran. And I got the privilege of leading that team from 4 people until last May, when they medically retired me. We had about 28.
At what moment did you see the need for Infocyte?
Pretty much once, our team in the Air Force was doing some, what we considered to be things we just needed to do to find hackers, to find people that had intruded on our network. Because a lot of the products that you have out there, like antivirus, just weren't finding things. And so we went out looking for things. We called ourselves the Enterprise Hunter Team. Went and hunted on a base or a site or an organization and looked for the signs of hackers being there undetected. And we were pretty successful with that. And when we started seeing all the hacks in the news, most of them were all hitting commercial organizations. So Target, Home Depot, you can see them in the headlines all the time. Defense contractors. And the biggest problem was we would actually get pieces of that malware and see the attack, and we couldn't do anything about it because we were government, we were military. And so I said, we can help them. We can find this stuff. There's a bunch of organizations hacked right now. We have the ability to find it, but we're in the military. We can't just show up to Target and say, we're from the government, we're here to help. So the only solution was to get out, create a commercial organization that could do that. And that's what started us on the path towards doing our own company, Infocyte.
Who are these hackers? Like, are they working for companies? Obviously, they're going to sell the information, but what do these people look like, and what makes companies most vulnerable to them?
It's always surprising the different. I've been in this intelligence world for a long time, so I get report after report, and we have dossiers on entire groups and organizations that hack people for a living. So it depends on what kind. The ones that are hitting commercial organizations are all mostly out of Eastern Europe, mostly because the laws are looser, and so you don't have strict laws about computer crimes because they have bigger issues to deal with than a couple of guys with computer science degrees hacking people in the United States. And so you have an entire organization of people in like Ukraine that their entire job is to hack into American retailers and steal credit cards. And they make millions doing it. And no one really gets them in trouble because it's very hard to find who did it and then actually have the jurisdiction to do something about it.
Do you see a particular shift happening in the cybersecurity industry?
There's a lot of change, but that's because there needs to be a lot of change. I don't think we have all the answers right now. Infocyte, for instance, we're not trying to prevent attacks because there's a lot of people working on that right now. The systems in place right now, the computers that we use are inherently vulnerable to hackers. And so we dedicated Infocyte to being able to tell an organization if they've been hacked right now, or for instance, if someone's doing a mergers and acquisition, you're buying another company, investing in a company, we give the ability to do a third-party check to see if that company's clean first. That process has not existed before. And so that's what we're bringing.
What kind of devices are really vulnerable in this setting? Can I bring in Clinton for a second? Okay, so there is a lot of controversy. The company has multiple devices that their employees are using. And then they also host their websites through WordPress, or I guess I'm trying to say, what devices, either Mac or Windows, should a company be really aware of that are most attractive to hackers?
I'd say all of them, but that's, the issue is that everyone has a proliferation of devices. You have, your computer at home, you got your computer at work, and you've got your iPhone or your Android in your hand. And for most people nowadays, you're doing work on all of them. And you have a laptop that goes on a Wi-Fi network at Starbucks, and you bring it back to work. So there's this concept going around that basically there is no more border to your network. Your network is not a moat, it's not a castle. It's just urban warfare. Like, everybody's just going around everywhere, and you can't protect the border, you can't protect a door anymore. Like, every device is going everywhere. And how do you manage that? No one really has the answer to that right now.
How can you tell if you've been hacked in the past? Do you do an internet search on yourself? If you don't have access to a third party who's going through my emails or going through my devices, how can I even be sure that I'm safe?
For most people, it's when your credit card starts being used without your permission. There's different industries that do it better than others. So banking, and they're probably the best because they have pretty sophisticated fraud detection. So if they go to this Eastern European website that's selling credit cards that are stolen in the United States, the bank fraud department will actually buy a chunk of those cards, find out where they were all used at in a certain amount of time. It's called a common point of purchase. And then figure out, Home Depot was hacked because all of these cards that are being sold on the black market were used at Home Depot in the last 3 months. So they have really sophisticated ways to do it. Individually, it's more difficult. You just hope that your antivirus works. And if you're being targeted by someone, it's probably not going to do it.
So let's talk companies and what they can do to protect themselves. Let's start with their website. It's the biggest aspect of their company next to their team. Can you elaborate more on the vulnerabilities of the plugins and just WordPress as a whole?
My expertise is in malware, so it's like I can't speak specifically to WordPress, but for the most part, the issue is really about protecting your infrastructure and making sure that no one can get into that back end. So the only thing exposed to the internet is that the user front end, and so that's the application space, as they call it. So that's what's being attacked now, is that application front end, and usually a lot of times it'll be the authentication mechanisms. How do you authenticate your users? How do you know that that person is who they say they are? And so there's lots of ways to do that. I'm a huge fan of a process called OAuth, which is like single sign-on. And so if you go to a website and they say, well, you can log in with username and password, or you can use your Google account or your Facebook account. And instead of making a username and password, you just click, I'm already logged into Facebook, authenticate me through Facebook. That is a lot better than, because right now I've got an iPhone with like 100 apps on it, and I've got web apps all over the place, and I have 200 different passwords for 200 different sites, and they all have to be different. Because if they're all the same, one gets hacked, the weakest one, and I lose everything. And so there's just a huge problem right now with everyone having different passwords everyone, and no one can remember them. I hate passwords. I think passwords should go away. If you're making an app, don't require passwords. Use Google, use Facebook. They're providing that service. So that's what the users want.
Can you explain that more? Are you saying that you should use third parties like Facebook to create accounts for other just websites or?
Yeah, so the authentication mechanism is one of the weakest ones in websites. And so if you use a Facebook or use a Google, yeah, you're giving that to a third party, but Google's a whole lot better than most of us at security. So you can trust that their security team is going to make sure that authentication mechanism works. And it used to be, it was only like 4 years ago, people were saying, well, cloud, do I want to go to cloud? Because cloud I don't control. Well, it actually is now the opposite. Do you really want to maintain your own infrastructure and your own insecurity? Or do you want to put your files in something like Box, where they have a dedicated security team that's a lot better than yours? And they're going to protect it in a central location instead of having 100 clients with their own security and their own networks that they have to protect.
So Brian, you work with Box, is that correct?
Yeah, I do.
Do you want to add on to that?
I think it's spot on. Yeah.
Okay.
Going to the cloud, and you specialize in security and trying to secure the content you think is very important. So that's exactly the message that we communicate to the companies we speak to.
Yeah, I think that shift has only been happening in the last few years, though. And there's still some people kicking and dragging, towards cloud. But nowadays, the cloud is actually more secure than your personal stuff, because they've figured that out in such a way. Instead of having 100 people deal with their own security, you have one company dealing with the security, and everyone else just uses that.
How do you think that shift started, or where along the lines did people say, you know what, I am going to put my trust in a third party when all the horror stories are all we hear in the news? Do you think there's a particular incident or reason that shift has started?
I can't really name one. I don't know if you could either, but that's just the one I've noticed. I've been an advocate of cloud technologies for a long time. Centralization, and that's how computers used to be back in the 80s. Everything was a mainframe, and you had really sophisticated network admins that maintained that mainframe, and everyone else was just a user. And then that went away in the 90s, and now we had everyone has a personal computer that could do anything, and people just decided to start making malware and compromising everybody's computers. And so we're seeing a shift back to centralization, where you can have people who are dedicated and knowledgeable maintain a centralized system, and then have reduced user privileges for all of your users out there.
Are there certain people in a company that are specifically or particularly vulnerable in these kind of attacks, or should?
As individuals? They are, but the only thing that's really in your control as an individual is your password, or the way that you authenticate. And so choosing a good password is basically really the only thing you can do to protect your own personal accounts. There was a hack of Apple iCloud, and some Jennifer Lawrence, her pictures all over the place. That wasn't a hack of iCloud. That wasn't the problem. That wasn't Apple and their insecurity. That was individuals not protecting their own accounts. And so they went in through the personal information, got into their iCloud, authenticated as that person, and grabbed the stuff. So the onus is on you to protect the way that you authenticate into that app. And so passwords, that's just something that most users have a very difficult time creating complicated enough ones that aren't hard to guess for a computer.
I have two questions then. One, how do you recommend we store our passwords? And two, is there a service that we can use that creates a safe password for us?
Now this is just, Chris Gerritz talking, but because even between people in my company, we all debate about this. But I personally use a password manager. I think most people should because it's easier. But it'll generate a random password for all your different apps. So your Google, your Facebook, your email. It'll generate a very long, complicated password for each of those. You store it in your password manager, and you only have to remember one password, and you keep that cycling and changing every 3 months or however long you think you need to. But 3 months is recommended. Having random passwords in all the different apps is good because if one is compromised, they can't get into your email. That's the biggest problem right now for individuals is they share the password of their email account with some app that doesn't have a security team. And then that gets hacked, they have their password, they get into their email. And once they have their email, they can get into everything else because they just do password resets and they can capture that.
Do you think companies should share passwords on a public drive with all the employees?
No.
And I say that because I have worked for companies that have all the files on a public drive where everyone in the office can access it. And I mean, as an employee, I could easily go and change those, but taking that situation, what would you recommend they do to fix that?
As far as like enterprise management of files, I mean, some of the, I hate to go back to Box, but I'm a user, I'm a believer. Dropbox for Business, of course, if you want to plug those guys into, they're here in Austin, I think. But those services are starting to think about that. Enterprise management of passwords. I think last year I went to a security conference, a big one called DEF CON Black Hat. And I saw at least 6 or 7 different companies, startups, that were dedicated purely to the enterprise management of passwords that had to be shared between other people. Because that problem has not been solved very well. And so there's all these people trying to figure it out, and I don't know what's the right one. Just because sharing passwords has been pretty much what people do right now, and it's wrong, and the security guy will always tell you it's wrong, but people do it anyway because they have a business to run.
What should a company do if they have an employee who has done the absolute worst case scenario and changed passwords, given information to another competitor? Where does that cleanup process begin?
That's always a horrible situation, but I was in Air Force Cyber Command when Snowden took all the information and leaked it everywhere, and the whole question is still not answered yet. How do you deal with someone who's inside and has complete access to everything, and you have to trust that person and everything? So I don't think anybody's really quite figured out how to manage that, because never before have we had a situation where a single person can have the keys to the whole kingdom, walk out with a little thumb drive that has everything of value for your organization, and just disappear. That's never happened in the history of the world where that's been possible, but now it is, because everything of value now is on the internet or on some hard drive.
How did your team first respond when Snowden came out? You brought it up, so.
I'm a huge privacy fan, so there's some cheers and some other people who said trade. So we had lots of debates, and I think those debates are still going. My personal feelings about it is that he did the right thing, but we still need to punish people for doing that. So in essence, I just think he's courageous for doing it. But you can't honor someone who does something and illegal like that and share secrets, because it just encourages other people to do that when it's not appropriate. I think in this case it was, but it's hard to allow that when those secrets mean lives are lost if they get out. So it's this gray area that sucks to have an answer for, because I don't have an answer for it.
Let's talk more about your company. What is Infocyte doing differently in the cybersecurity industry?
So our particular niche, because there's quite a few cybersecurity companies, there's a lot of people who just do security, and for the most part, everyone just says it's security, right? But what we're doing is filling a particular niche in third-party assessments. And so what we saw was that there's not a whole lot of, there's no affordable and quick method for another organization to verify if another one is clean or not. There's a couple companies doing these. They're called compromise assessments, and they cost $250,000 to, one was just done on the Department of Veteran Affairs, and they charged them close to $1 million. So that is completely out of touch for most people. And so now you're seeing data breach insurance markets are going up. Companies like AIG are giving a data breach policy to a company, but they're not checking to make sure they're clean first before they get that policy, because there is no cost-effective means to do that as a third party. So we have a product that basically is one box, bring it onto the network. You can scan all the workstations and servers and make sure there's no rootkits, there's no malware, there's no indications of credentials being misused. And so we can, within a few days and a fraction of the cost of what it currently costs, assess a network and tell them if they're clean or not before they do some kind of thing like invest in that company, buy that company, give them a data breach insurance policy. So third-party assessments is what we do.
Can you share a horror story that you've seen or dealt with?
Every horror story I've ever been in has a non-disclosure agreement or classification. Yeah. But there's been some good ones. I kind of get excited when bad things happen, and I don't know if that's good or not, but it's just, hacking is an art, and when the bad guy hacks and they did something just completely crazy, I get excited about that. And you see the art in that other person, even though they did a horrible thing to you. And it's just like, wow, these guys are geniuses. Like, how they figured this out? They got into a network I thought was completely impenetrable, but they figured it out. And so every time someone gets hacked, I always get excited to learn how they did it. I'm there to try to stop them, but it's that curiosity and how they did it that really drives me in this business.
So one of your company's components has a patent pending, and that is your agentless deployment. Can you tell us more about that?
So traditionally, workstations and servers are protected by an antivirus product. And so that's something you install on every computer. And then, big security companies are starting to, they brand it as advanced endpoint threat detection. That's the branding. All it is really like antivirus 2.0. They install another thing on each computer and workstation, and it's supposed to find viruses better. And a lot of them do. But the problem is you have to install it on every workstation and computer, and if anybody here has ever run servers and stuff, you don't want more stuff running in the background, when you're trying to have a web service or a cloud. And so our product runs very similarly to, I guess this is not a security product, so I can't make that analogy. But it's one box, and you basically do you load the username and password for the domain, and it scans each computer and only touches each computer for about 30 seconds, and then removes any sign of what I did. So I don't have to be resident on that computer. I don't have to install anything on that computer. I just query it, scan it. 30 seconds later, it returns that data to me. And so I don't have to pre-install anything. I can just come in with one box, load up the credentials, scan the network, and then be out in 2 or 3 days, depending on the size of the network. And then give them a report based on what we found. And so that whole process of deploying those scans in a manner that doesn't affect the network horribly and doesn't affect the endpoint system, because you don't want to change your scan. You want it to affect it too much where you can't get the evidence from the hack that happened that you detected. And so that whole method is what we devised and submitted a patent for. So.
I think this is relevant to my next question, but how do you set up a security status for employees who are still able to work in a productive way instead of a slow and secure way?
Yeah, that's always that's what you get into, security versus your ability to execute. A lot of security folks are sometimes looked at as the opposite of no, you can't do that because it's not secure. But me moving from a security engineer to now a CEO of a company, I constantly have to make decisions where I have to override the security because my business has to run, and we have to be efficient. And sometimes those security measures are not efficient and they slow you down. And so you have to make a use case. There's a 1% chance this thing could go horribly wrong if we go forward, but there's an 80% chance we'll double the income on our next sale. That's worth it. And sometimes you have to make that decision as a business leader, the engineer, or the security guy at me says, don't do it, because you're exposing something. And so you have to find a line in the middle between efficiency and security. And the best security measures are always the ones that don't affect you and slow you down. You do have to have some of those, but the best ones don't slow you down.
Who should handle these types of decisions in a company? And for new hires, what type of things are you looking for in someone where you could eventually trust them to make those decisions?
Startups are really funny because security is not always the number one thing in a startup. Even in a security startup like Infocyte, the number one thing for us is getting a product out before we run out of money. And for a lot of people that write code, sometimes just getting to work is glorious. Getting to be secure is the next step. Let's get it working first. Okay, it's working. We need to make some money on this too. So in those first stages of a startup, a lot of times your app isn't as secure as it should be. But if you waited till it was fully secure, you run out of money. So in a startup, you have to weigh that. You have to constantly be thinking about it. Do things that will introduce security into your app as you go, but realize you're gonna have to strike a balance because time is not on your side. And so sooner or later you're gonna have to wrap around and get to it. And if you didn't make it easy for yourself in the first part of building your app, you're going to have a very hard time transitioning and making it secure once it's fully built and you have 1,000 users. Then security, you're way past the boat. So at some point before you get so inundated with customers, you have to have that mindset where I'm going to build where this thing can be secured along the way.
What steps did you take when you were building this startup, or where in the process did you include security in that plan?
Well, for us, we're a security company, so we went from the start. We basically, at almost every decision, because we're all security engineers, and we all had a security background, every time something is going to expose something or make something less secure, that comes up in the meeting. And sometimes the answer is minimum viable product, let's just move forward. And we will fix it before we launch the product. But make it easy for us to fix it. Don't make it hard for ourselves by doing something totally crazy. But sometimes you just have to make those decisions when you're in beta testing or you're very early in a company. But for the most part, if you plan it from the start that security is important, there are things you can do to make things easier to transition to a fully secured app as you go. If you don't start with those questions, if you're not asking those questions in the process, you'll get to a point where your app is so complicated that you don't even understand the security implications of it. And then it's too late.
Where did you find your team members?
The core group was all working with my team in the Air Force. And then growing from there, we found just personal network, really. We have not made a single hire that's been someone we didn't know. So it's all been by referrals, it's been by references, and we're only 9 people right now, but the original 3 are all Air Force officers and a government civilian. And so beyond that, it's been all just personal networking.
Is there a particular reason you chose San Antonio? I know you were based there, but is there a reason you chose to stay there instead of moving to Austin or maybe California?
Well, I don't want to move to California, but we actually seriously considered going to Austin. And so, because we look at Austin and lots of startups, it seems to be the startup capital of Texas. But San Antonio is a different type of capital, and that's the capital of cybersecurity. San Antonio has 81 different cybersecurity companies. And a lot of them are focused towards the government because San Antonio has Air Force Cyber Command, it has Air Force Intel Command, it's got NSA Texas, which is a complete copy of Fort Meade. It's just, there's a lot of assets there and there's a lot of talent. And as we grow, we have a foot in the door there because that's our roots. And so as we grow, that network and having a foot in the door in San Antonio is why we need to stay there. And of course, we come up to Austin a lot, and it's close. So it's actually the best of both worlds.
Considering your 80 plus competitors, to what do you credit your success in finding funding?
Well, for most of the part, a lot of cybersecurity companies, especially in the United States, are focused on serving the government because the government has the greatest need and they pay the most money. So that they want new products regardless of what it costs, and they need talent, and they are growing faster than they can get it. And so a lot of these companies are focused towards the government, and the government is very slow, it's very bureaucratic, and so most companies get bogged down in that. We decided when we started we weren't going to do any business with government. It's too slow, can't do it with a startup. We're going to build a product. There's not a whole lot of product companies in San Antonio, they're all mostly services. And we're going to be focused on commercial. So those two alone separate us from most of the other cybersecurity companies in San Antonio.
What was that transition like for you, going from working for the government and then focusing on commercial?
I could write a book on this, I think, but it's interesting because the military is it can be very regimented. Being in the military for 10 years, being enlisted, going to be an officer, I've seen a lot of different sides of it. But for the most part, you learn what you need to learn from it. You reject the things that don't work in a startup, like the bureaucracy and the things that really drive out creativity. So too much process and you drive out creativity. And being able to see that difference between the military and being in a startup where it's no rules, you basically start with a clean slate. Every decision that comes at you is a fork in the road, and you have to decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And you have pretty much absolute creativity to do what you need, what you want, and then choosing a path and walking it. That's all on you. So I think the military doesn't prepare you for that. I personally was ready for that change. I wanted that opportunity to do something creative and crazy and just jump off the cliff and go.
I have a few more questions before I open it up to the audience, but I want to go back to advice you would give to companies. So would you recommend that companies encrypt their confidential data?
My official answer is yes. My unofficial answer is that encrypting data at rest isn't always going to help you, because a lot of times that data is being taken from like a database that, regardless if it's encrypted or not, it's always on and it's always being accessed by your web app. So that data has to be delivered in an unencrypted form to your users. And so if you're using the data, it can't be encrypted. And since you're always using the data, it's not going to be encrypted, regardless of what it's being in the back end. And so a lot of people have this misconception that encryption is the answer to all of it. And it's not all the time. But there are good things to do. There are things to do for encryption. Like if you have a laptop, you should be encrypting that hard drive because it's going to get stolen. Just expect it. So if you have personal information on a laptop, encrypt that hard drive, make sure you have a strong password. So there's ways to do it, but it's not a pill that's going to solve all our problems.
Should a company run social engineering tests on personnel? And if so, should they inform them after the tests have gone through?
Yes, you should. In fact, I used to do that. But people need to realize that, so I think the analogy is physical security. So in physical security, when you're at your home, you feel pretty safe. And you do things like, put your keys somewhere and you forget about them, leave your door unlocked because you're at home and you're safe. If you go to a neighborhood that's not so nice and not so good, somewhere in Houston that's, just high crime, you act differently and you protect yourself a little more. You put your wallet in your front pocket. You do things to protect yourself because you're in a neighborhood that's bad. And with the internet and cybersecurity, if you're connected to the internet, you're in a bad neighborhood all the time. And so you need to do things like that all the time.
Well, I'm from Houston and I use the internet, so I'll keep that in mind.
Okay.
Let's see. Can companies predict cybercrime rather than simply respond to it?
I don't think so. I think my personal idea on the solution for it relies on attribution. We have to know who's attacking and we have to have consequences for it. Because currently there aren't any consequences and it's very difficult to find out who's on the other end. Until we can figure out who's on the other end and then apply consequences, people are going to keep doing it. They're going to keep hacking. You can put up the biggest wall in the world and someone's going to find a way to chisel their way through it. And so that's a huge thing that's going on right now with the FBI and some other government organization is trying to find, just, gather all the information in the world so they can find these guys. Once they find them, having the jurisdiction to do something about it. So I think because the internet is global, because e-commerce is global, we're going to start seeing more international cooperation with attribution and consequences for hacking. I think that's going to be the next 15 years. You're going to see a lot more cooperation internationally. And I think that's really needed to happen. It needs to happen in order to stop this whole thing, or at least calm it down.
What does it look like right now if I get hacked and I want to take legal action? Can I really?
Not really. You can tell, tell the authorities and they're going to log it. But unless it's a critical mass, because there's so many people getting hacked these days, and a lot of them, like your credit card, will get hacked, and they'll start using it and they'll buy iPhones with it. And you report it to your bank, but really there's nothing you can do individually. They're going to issue a new one. The bank's going to handle it. For a lot of these hacks, consumers are protected. The bank's going to handle it. Someone's going to handle the cost of that. It's going to disrupt your life for a little bit, but someone's going to handle that bill. And so those organizations are trying very hard to fix this problem because they're footing the bill right now. One thing you can do is, if you're doing online transactions in a site that you don't really trust, always use your credit card, not your bank account card. Because if they steal your bank account card and they max it out, you don't have any money left. If they max out your credit card, that's just a little switch that Visa can just turn back on. So.
Last question before I open it to the audience, but pretty general. Where do you see most companies' security mistakes happen?
In not thinking about security early enough. I think there's just, especially with San Francisco startups, with apps, there's this path to trying to get to the minimum viable product, to getting a product out as fast as possible, getting as many users as possible, with the problem that once you get to a critical mass of users, you're now switching from this design the app phase to serving your customers. And going back and trying to integrate security measures is going to disrupt that. And so if you're not thinking about it from the beginning, you're going to have a very hard time integrating it when it finally becomes a real big issue because you have 1 million customers in their data. So.
We'll open the floor for questions.
Chris, why do we see so many legit products and companies add on or agree to add on junkware and bloatware? That's something I deal with a lot in my day-to-day activities with insurance agents.
Yeah, like Lenovo is one.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Lenovo sells a laptop to consumers that's priced below what it costs Lenovo to create the product. And so the only way to actually get their money's worth is they take sponsorships from these really junk applications and allow those applications to be put on the laptop and be sold with it as a package. So they're getting kickbacks with that. with all those apps they put on there. That's the only way those really cheap laptops are able to be sold. And so companies like Lenovo, with their laptop, one of the third-party apps that they added basically destroyed every security measure on the thing. In each bank transaction using SSL was decryptable. Like anybody can intercept it. And that was some third-party adware that they had put on to try to make some money. So bloatware is never good, I don't think, as a legitimate company. Like, you shouldn't be putting bloatware on if you care about your customers. If you're trying to make it as cheap as possible and hit that bottom market, sometimes you have to, but verify these other third parties that you're putting on, because your security is only as good as all the people that you work with and integrate with.
Infocyte do, what you actually do is like audits of a company's policies and settings on their systems, or is it actually software that you use to flush out any issues in your entire network?
So the current assessment market is actually quite big. Almost every bank gets assessments, every retailer gets assessments. They're called vulnerability assessments or compliance assessments. And compliance assessments are going to say, are you following all the rules? Are your policies good to make you secure? That vulnerability assessment is going to come in and say, you have holes in your network, or this application is vulnerable and could be hacked. So they're saying, can you be hacked? The question they aren't answering in any of these assessments that are being conducted is, are you currently hacked right now? That's what we answer.
Are you already hacked right now? Yeah. Gotcha. Where do you see most of those vulnerabilities occurring in companies? Is there specific, like the users or the applications they use or the content that's being leaked out? Or where do you see the vulnerabilities showing up most of the time?
For the most part, it's users and email. Email, spear phishing, and phishing. So they're constantly bombarded by junk email. Used to be called phishing, where they would just send it to everyone and hope someone clicked on it. Now they're doing something called spear phishing. And spear phishing is where I will research you because you're a leader of an organization and you're on LinkedIn and Facebook, and I can get all your friends lists, and I'll spoof an email from one of your friends and say, click on this. And that's specifically targeted to you because I want access to the organization you work for. And that's how they'll get access. So that's becoming very common. So it's spear phishing.
So when you're detecting, let's say, a rat on the network, do you use heuristic scanning or like signature-based detection? What?
A little bit of both. We start with signatures mainly for whitelisting. So instead of having a bunch of bad signatures like antivirus does, we have a 4.5 billion hash database of good software that vendors have provided. So we filter out all the good software that should be out there on that network. And then we use memory analytics. So we actually scan volatile memory for characteristics of malware. So if it's communicating with an outside site, if it's got, forgive me if I get a little techie, but anti-forensics techniques, it's trying to evade detection, trying to evade analysis. All these characteristics are pretty much only common to malware. And we detect those and flag those and pull those files or memory images back so we can analyze them. Does that answer?
Do you guys partner with any like managed service providers or other companies that provide services that may provide services to tech companies?
Yeah, so two of our beta partners are professional services companies, and so they actually do assessments for other people. That was the whole thing from our product standpoint. When we first started doing this, we built a command line tool that we could do, and we would go out and do assessments, and we realized real quick that we can't scale that. Like, I'm only one person and I've got 8 hours a day, and hiring more people, we're not going to get better. We're going to grow to a size where now I have to start hiring people that don't know what I know.
Yeah.
So we decided pretty early on that we were going to build a product and train and equip other people to do these assessments. And we're going to put all of our brain power into making that easier and making sure that our product can do the scan and detect what they want to detect without having to be there on site for them. So we do equip professional services companies. We haven't worked with a managed service provider yet, but that's a future thing.
So, how does your product deal with Ring 0 viruses and stuff when I'm assuming you're operating in user mode? So.
Yeah, we have multiple. So we have 2 surveys, and we divide them between what's our S1 survey is what goes out to every computer, and it's user mode. And actually, it detects a lot of rootkits, a lot of Ring 0 stuff. Mostly because, what's that? Ring 0 is kernel mode. Computers are separated into user space and kernel space. It's kind of complicated, but user space is what most applications are in. And a rootkit is a type of malware that hides from user space and is inside the kernel, inside the operating system. Very, very difficult to find. But most rootkits have gotten so complicated that they have user mode components. And so we are detecting almost every variant of rootkits out there that we've analyzed have a user mode component that we can find with the user mode one. When we want to go deeper, we'll actually drop a kernel module on the box. And that's our S2 survey. It's heavier, it's higher risk. So we generally ask for permission or have to have a reason to do that. And that will detect a lot of the stuff that's Ring 0.
I have a question. How do you dispose safely devices that have been infected or are defective?
It depends on who you're protecting from, because you can wipe a hard drive several times, and I know certain organizations I can put it back together. If you're not trying to protect against those guys, then just wiping the drive. Like Apple actually has it all built in. Like when you delete stuff, secure delete is a secure delete for all intents and purposes, unless you're trying to protect against certain organizations. So Apple has it all built in. For Windows and stuff, you can actually buy applications that do secure delete, where it's actually writing over the data instead of just removing a reference to it, which is how Windows deletes files right now. So I've realized that if you're deleting something on Windows, it's just deleting the reference, it's still on the hard drive.
This may be the same answer as before, but you mentioned that email was the most common area that companies had vulnerability. So another question would be, which area of vulnerability do you see log has the biggest risk for other companies?
Risk?
Yeah, which one was the biggest danger to a company was exploited?
It depends on what size. So large organizations have a lot of attack surface. They have a lot of users, and they go into a lot of websites. And there are websites that serve up malware. The best way to deliver malware, like the most scalable way, is to hack an ad network. You hack an ad network and you switch out the banner ad that's being displayed on 1 million different websites with a piece of malware. So you go to that site, you download the banner ad, it also comes with a little package. So those are just customers just going to a site that they used to go to all the time and just getting malware. They didn't do anything wrong, but they were a victim. So those are very scalable attacks that can hit a lot of people. The ones that are generally not as effective because they're hitting everyone. The antivirus companies find them very quickly and build a mitigation for it. But they have to find them first. Someone has to get hit, then they'll inoculate everyone else. So that's what antivirus does. Someone has to get hurt first, then they'll figure out how to fix it. That's what the holy grail of security now is, to try to stop this stuff before the first one hits. But that's the holy grail.
I'm just curious, if I was a hacker and I was doing this, why wouldn't I focus all my efforts into hacking LastPass, right? Or, that's it. If I got that, I get everything for everybody, or for everybody that buys into it.
Yeah, technically that won't work because of the way that they encrypt everything using user credentials that they don't store. So you can hack into the backend servers of LastPass, and this is a good way to do your app. And actually, this is the way Box is run, where you can get into the backend servers, but everything's encrypted, and it's encrypted with a key that only the user has. So even though you have access to the backend, you don't have the keys to unlock it. Now, if you want to get really complicated, there's like ways to intercept it when that user logs in, but that's just getting crazy. You're going to get caught before that ever happens. So things like LastPass are very secure on the back end. The thing you have to protect against is when you enter that password to get into LastPass, is anywhere in that line, is your personal computer or your phone hacked, and are they intercepting that password? Now they have the keys to your data. But I still think that's a lower risk than trying to manage 100 different sites and apps with different passwords or the same password. Still a better risk.
What are the risks of creating just different social media accounts, like LinkedIn or Facebook, things we don't even think of? Where is the risk of just identity theft or anything we can do to protect ourselves when we're encouraged to put our information out there?
This is a personal opinion of mine, but I think we do ourselves a disservice by continually trying to protect PII. Personally identifying information, because all of us, especially our age group, give it up all the time to everybody. Think of the last time you had to use your birthday and your address, all your personal information. Every site you go to, you put that in. And every account you open, you put that in. So there's 100 places that now have my personal information. And I still expect my personal information to be private, but I've given it to everybody. So I think we need a fundamental rethinking of what privacy is, and realize that the younger generation really doesn't care as much. And they actually, kind of want a presence online. They want a Google Plus account and a LinkedIn account that someone who's interested could look me up and contact me. I want people, I used to have very little information on my LinkedIn, very little information on my Facebook that was public, because I was in a critical position in the government, and I knew that there were people in other countries looking for me, because if they hack me, that means they hacked the Air Force. So I tried to have a low surface out there for them to find information on me. Now I run a company. I want everyone to know who I am. I want everyone to come to me and ask me about what I do. So I have everything out there, and I've given that personally up that freely. And I think a lot of people do that right now. They want to be noticed. They want to have a presence. And so we're giving our PII and our personal information everywhere. So we just need to rethink how we use it, and what privacy protection really means.
What business advice would you give to other individuals who are looking to start their own company?
Say that again?
What advice would you give from your own experience for individuals who are looking to start their own company?
Starting your own company? Well, gosh, I don't think there's any advice that I could give that wouldn't be already said by someone else. But there's one thing that I've noticed is there's a lot of advice out there, and not all of it is good. And so there's good advice and there's bad advice. When I first started, I didn't know anything. And so anybody who was willing to give me advice or started a company before, or even invested in the company because they ran into some money, were giving me advice, and I was absorbing it all. And I suddenly realized I can't apply all this advice because it's all conflicting. This guy says to do this, and this guy says to do this, and that's conflicting. And so, what you really have to realize is there's a lot of people that will give you advice, and not all of it's correct. And take it all in, learn from it, realize there's different perspectives and there's different ways to win. There's no one path. Figure out what your path is, and then apply the advice that works towards that path. And if you need to veer off and do something different, experience will teach you that. And pick mentors that are aligned with you and your thinking, so that they can push you in the direction that you want to go and give you the advice to miss the rocks in the road that they have seen before. But be willing to accept a lot of advice that won't apply to you.
As far as, I don't know if you have businesses or personally, but where do you think we're better off or worse off than we were, say, 10 years ago in terms of security, and where do you see that going in the next future? Do you think we're going to be more secure and we're going to kind of overcome some of the vulnerabilities that are out there from Eastern Europe, wherever, or where do you see that going, and I'm wondering where we come to this point?
10 years ago, no one thought about security. There were people that did, but they're a very small subset. And so everything was vulnerable. Windows was the most atrocious thing you could ever use. Today, we are more secure than we were 10 years ago. That is a fact. The problem is that we have more of value on the internet in our computers. And people even have money on the computer, Bitcoin. Like, everything of value is on there. Our pictures, our lives, our personal information, the communication, our money, our transactions, banks, it's all numbers in a computer. So as we put more value in the internet and on computers, we see people and criminals going there as well. No one's gonna jump into a bank and rob it with a gun. They're gonna hack into it from another country. It's much less risk.
Do you have any more questions? Yeah, in the back.
This is more content, but as proof of the 10 years ago, there was less security thing. If you've ever looked at SCADA systems, they're extremely vulnerable, and they're used to control a lot of major networks in cities and stuff. They're basically just a system that controls a physical system in a city, like floodgate or something. And there have been a number of hacks on those, which are pretty poor. That there's no security on these systems.
A lot of people will talk about like this cyber Pearl Harbor or something. Some event's gonna happen where someone with enough money and enough resources and enough political will, is going to take down the Western or Eastern Seaboard power system. Like, everyone's waiting for that. Everyone's trying to protect against it. It's a top presidential initiative to protect against it. But all of our power grid was built in the 70s, and we've got bolt-in computer systems running it all, and they're connected to the internet.
Wasn't the White House just hacked a few months ago, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, everyone's been hacked. Like, I don't think there's anybody that hasn't been hacked. And if you think you haven't been hacked, call me.
I think that's a great way to end it, actually. So, thank you for being here. Again, thank you so much, Chris, for being here with us. I want to remind you all that you can get your parking validated with Ashley in the front. It's $5. I'm not sure who our next speaker is, but our meetup is, I believe, in 3 weeks. We'll definitely get that out to you soon once we get the link. If we don't have your email, please give it to us, and have a great night.